Okay, episode 43.
Yeah, episode 43. How's everything going over there?
Pretty good, actually. I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad you asked. So today is actually Father's Day in Australia and New
Mm-hmm.
Zealand.
I
So
see.
one of the interesting things is, as far as I know, Mother's Day is universally on the same day. Actually, it's the
Hmm.
last. Is it second Sunday in May or something like that?
Yeah, something like
Anyway,
that.
yeah, Father's Day is actually on different days, at least here and North America. Actually, I'm not sure what the situation is in Europe. When I lived in North America, this presented something of a problem for me, as when it was Father's Day in Australia, I couldn't find a card anywhere in North America that said Father's Day. So you'd have to sort of plan months in advance and buy the card when you could, and then store it and send it to Dad. So anyway, so yeah, these are the challenges that immigrants face, right?
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, today is Father's Day here, and yeah, I just I mean, it's pretty much the same celebration. It's the same as it is over there, but I always like to spare a thought for alienated fathers on today. I'm very fortunate that I'm a dad. I get to be very involved, have always been very involved in my daughter's life, and my wife and I are together, which is increasingly uncommon these days,
Mm-hmm.
and anyway, yeah, I always think I don't know how I would have coped, or I'm not sure I would have
Mm-hmm.
coped with being
Right.
alienated. So
Mm.
I really do, spare a thought for all the dads out there who do not get to spend time with their kids.
Right. Absolutely.
So yeah, so that's anyway, Australia Day in sorry, Father's Day in Australia and New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just had a
Yeah.
nice
Well, absolutely. And nobody really expects the head honcho of the site of the red pills voice for men to actually be a married father.
Quite right. Exactly. So it's no secret that Paul Elam is in a long-term relationship. Paul has said
Yes.
that publicly, so I'm comfortable saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've had a number of conversations, lovely conversations with his partner. She's a lovely lady. I won't say her name or anything, but I'm not sure, Paul has. But anyway, yeah, this is often there's a real disparity between the way sometimes we're perceived and the reality of the situation. That's right,
Mm-hmm.
Paul Elam and myself, and dare I say, Vernon, you're also a married
I
man as
am.
well.
Yeah, but
Three of
not yet a
us.
fa yeah, not yet a father though, but maybe someday.
No, right, exactly. Not yet a
Yeah,
father, exactly, but
yeah,
a married man.
mm,
So all three of us are actually in stable relationships with women.
hmm,
So quite
exactly. Yeah,
different to sort of the
sure.
the image that's sometimes painted of the
Yep.
angry man. We have men who are separated and so forth, and men who have been completely screwed over by the system. And by the way, I mean, probably, jokes aside, I've always said anger is a legitimate response to
Mhm. Of
injustice, and
course.
there are plenty of men out there who are angry, but of course that gets played up in the system, and they talk about men who are, try to put down the men who are angry, but a lot of them have very legitimate reasons for being angry. But
Yeah.
of course, they try to paint us in a negative light. It's
Well, exactly. Well, I mean, we keep getting even some people who claim to be MRAs, some people who claim to be what do you call caring about men's issues and something, trying to keep on separating red pill from the men's movement. Now,
mm,
I'm not saying that everyone in the men's movement has to, absolutely has to be red pill or else, but the overlap is such that, you can't, they're not two separate, vastly different worlds, and we still get misrepresented even by men's advocates, some of them.
mm, mm,
Obviously, we know a lot of us, Paul's red pill. I consider myself red pill, and we got so many that classify themselves as such.
mm,
So yeah, I think you know you knock it off if you're trying to kind of keep this divide going, as if
mm,
you're kind of buying into the mainstream narrative that red pill is all this the PUAs, the Andrew Tates, and whoever.
mm,
And I'm
mm,
not even rabid anti-Andrew Tate guy. I mean, I don't think he's all that useful, but the point I'm
mm,
making is, uh, uh, don't misunderstand the red pill. It's just about finding an alternative to the gynocentric narrative and the gynocentric cultural narrative, and and the way things have been going on, the big setup here. And yeah, that's all the red pill is,
That's right.
so yeah.
Exactly. I do find there is something of a problem where there are a lot of people who broadly agree with us, right?
Mhm.
But they are very cautious about, some of them don't want to talk to us at all, and some of them will talk to us privately, but not publicly admit an association. And what bothers me about that is that they're letting the other side control the narrative, right?
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
they'll slander us, okay, and then of course because we've been slandered, these people will then be very cautious about at least publicly talking to us, even though lots of people talk to us privately and agree with us. So my suggestion to anyone who's a bit concerned about that is don't let them control the narrative, and
Mhm.
just if you agree with what we're saying, then don't be too concerned about the slander that's being thrown at us, because I think if anyone who genuinely looks at what we're doing with an open mind will see that it's nonsense.
And to those out there that want to keep talking about the red pill and
Mm.
keep misrepresenting us, if you have any semblance of courage at all, talk to us. We are the red pill. We
Yes,
are the
that's
red
right.
pill. It's not the PUAs that misuse the term. It's not people who just follow Andrew Tate and just do whatever he says or whatever. We are.
Mm.
Paul is. I am. Robert, are you?
Yes, I
Yeah,
am.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. We are the red pill. So you reach out to us, speak to us, and stop pretending it's them.
Mm.
Yeah.
And in particular on that point, we, when we have run events and so forth, everyone's welcome to come along as long as they're not disruptive. We had at every single ICMI that I've been at, there've been feminists, and a number of other events we've had, feminists have come along. They're welcome to ask questions and so forth, as long as I said, the only thing we object to is people being disruptive. In contrast, anti-feminists and MRAs and so forth are often not allowed to go to feminist events, or on the few occasions, I can only think of actually one event where they were allowed at all, and a few years ago, and they were restricted and had to sort of I think they had to pre-vet the questions and that sort of thing. So it was a bit
Yeah.
ridiculous. That was a number of years ago.
Mhm.
So yeah, we're not afraid to have our ideas challenged.
Mhm.
If you think that we've said something wrong, challenge us online or in person or whatever it happens to be. We're not afraid for you to talk to us. The other side is often afraid of us asking them questions.
Mhm.
Mm.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. That was interesting how the discussion, moved on from Father's Day. Actually, further to that point about what we were talking about before, and
Mhm.
about talking about the three of us being in stable
Yep.
relationships with women and so forth.
Right.
There is, of course, MGTOW, which of course is, it's interesting. It's a fairly broad area, and
Mhm.
there have been some MGTOW which have actually been hostile to us and so forth. But on the other hand, there are plenty of MGTOW who are involved with what we're doing as well. It's they have made that decision to in general not form relationships with women and so forth, or not form long-term relationships with women.
Mhm.
I think it's up to each individual to make that decision.
Mhm.
And when it comes down to issues and so forth, there's a lot of different groups that do see the issues and do agree, and I think we should always work together to try to resolve
Yep.
these things.
Yep. And everything I said about the red pill can be applied to MGTOW too, because all MGTOW is just the personal liberty aspect
Yeah.
of what we've been talking about. Going your own way. Who except an authoritarian could be against that?
Exactly, and which is interesting because people say how many MGTOW are there, and everyone's I'm like, I don't know, because they're going their own way. There's no
Hmm.
record of them. There's no organization of MGTOW. We have
Right.
no idea how big it is.
Hmm.
And I think there are a lot of MGTOW
Yep.
out there. There are certainly, yeah, there are a lot of, and I suspect we're seeing
Hmm.
quite a lot of young men who are really being quite cautious about
Hmm.
relationships. And that's the other thing too, of course. It's somewhat generational as well. So young men coming up now are having a different experience
Hmm.
than, say, I did a few
Right.
decades ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What we're talking about here is
Mm.
that if somebody objects to you being MGTOW, and all the MGTOW are doing is trying to be cautious about this kind of thing, that means they're saying don't be cautious, just buy in, let yourself be scammed.
Which is a very tradcon thing to say, actually. We do see
Mm-hmm.
that quite a lot from the traditional
Yes.
conservatives, where they say, no, we've got to step up
Yep.
and right, exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of
More,
religious,
yeah, daily wire. Yep. But yeah.
a lot of Christian men actually comment
Mm,
online that at church they're being told from the pulpit to marry
mm.
single mothers and step up and this sort of thing. So
Yeah, step up. Yeah, we hear that a lot. I'm getting
man
sick of
up,
it. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Step up,
exactly.
man
Yeah.
up. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Right. Well, let's step down for a change. Let's get off the stupid whatever the hell it is.
it's up to each individual man to make their decision about what makes sense
Yep.
for them. That's
Mhm.
right. And as you say, in the end,
Yep.
MGTOW is actually a fairly simple idea. Years and years ago, there was this idea of different levels of MGTOW. I think that's all really fallen away, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's just about are the men willing to, what is the best value proposition for them? It could, in some cases, men may marry Western women. In some cases, they may go overseas and marry foreign women. In some cases, they may decide not to marry or not to get involved at all. And that's entirely up to them. So, which of course brings us to bachelor taxes, which I think we have talked about in the past, but it's
We might have, yeah.
good to remind everybody about bachelor taxes. A number of societies historically have actually punished men financially for not getting married. So
Mm.
the last time that I know of where that was even considered was 1920s in the US. I don't think anybody's seriously tried it since. It'd be probably hard to pass now, but who knows what the future holds.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next topic I've got, if we don't have anything else on MGTOW or men's rights or Father's Day, no.
I don't think so, but we are the Red Pill, we are MGTOW. So
Yeah,
that's the last thing I'll say on this one until I say it again. Um, but yeah,
yeah.
you better talk to us and talk about us and don't weasel your way out of this is all I
Yeah,
have to say on this
yeah.
one.
People say lots of awful things about us. In fact, I do honestly, personally, it really doesn't bother me. I actually spend quite a lot of time researching what is said about us, so I keep an eye on it and so forth.
Yep.
And until the site expired, I would regularly visit We Hunted the Mammoth. And just keep an eye on what David Futrell was saying about us, because he would often say things about A Voice for Men. He would say things about Paul or whatever. So I would keep an eye on that. But yeah, it's really I'd say 99.5% of what is said about us is really off base. It's
Right.
quite extraordinary, and I think a lot of it comes from willful ignorance. I think that they're quite intent on not really understanding what we're doing and what we're saying. And I'm always reminded of a quote, actually. I think it was Napoleon Bonaparte: "Don't interrupt your opponent when they're making a mistake."
Yeah, exactly.
So our opponents make a lot of mistakes like that by misunderstanding us and misrepresenting us and so forth. And they are continue to free to do so.
Exactly.
They feel free to do so. Continue doing so.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that they should stop just because I'm expressing my opinion here, but I'm also kind of challenging them.
Yeah.
Do something a little bit more integral for a change.
The truth is they're not going to change their ways,
Nope, they're
and
not.
so
Yep.
we can quite happily, and this is something that we've pursued over a number of years. We can quite happily point these sorts of things out and point out where they're making where they're making a mistake, and it won't change anything.
Right. Yep. All right.
So the next one I've got is the new economic policy. I'll be interested, Werner, to know whether you have ever heard of this before. So I'm a bit of a history geek. When I was younger, I had quite an interest in ancient history. It was only after I left high school, which admittedly was some time ago now, that I developed an interest in modern history. I learned something about the Soviet Union in the 1920s recently, within the last week, that I had never heard of before. So it turned out that in 1921, the Soviet economy was struggling. The revolution had happened a few years before. There'd been obviously a civil war and so forth. Lenin introduced limited capitalism to the Soviet Union. It was called, anyone wants to look it up, you can, I'm not making this up. It was called the New Economic Policy.
Yep.
A form of limited capitalism was introduced where private enterprises could be profit pursuing and public companies would try to pursue profits and so forth. it was still considered to be under state control, so they weren't completely letting the reins off. But this was actually done to attempt to stabilize the economy, which I found to be absolutely extraordinary. So basically, we've got Lenin saying, well, the economy's in a bad way, so we need some capitalism to fix it. So apparently even Lenin realized that capitalism was actually resulted in greater economic prosperity. It was meant to be a temporary measure. Lenin died in 1924. Stalin took over. Stalin abolished it in 1928. Okay. Now, even Lenin had only ever intended to be a temporary measure, but I do find, as I said, I do find interesting that here he was recognizing that capitalism was valuable. Now,
more like he was covering his ass.
I was gobsmacked when I first read it, honestly.
Yeah.
But, so now in 1928 it was abolished. Okay.
Yep.
When did the famine start in the Soviet Union? 1930. Right. So Stalin abolished it, and that's when, of course, the collectivization of farms started and all sorts of things. Right.
Yep.
Famines followed starting in 1930. So absolutely extraordinary. That the Soviet Union started out with limited capitalism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the sort of thing like in order to kind of make themselves, to put it mildly, look good, and kind of, actually make things that things are stable after they screw things over with socializing everything. They tend to kind of like to introduce a bit of capitalism there and then claim the credit for look at how great our economy is. Now, one thing
blame all the bad bits on the capitalism, maybe.
Right, exactly. Like, because wasn't Hong Kong sort of supposed to be like the great free market experiment for the People's Republic of China?
So my understanding of Hong Kong is that, okay, so first of all, a lot of people don't know this, but the UK did not have to give all of Hong Kong territory back to to China. Okay. So Hong Kong Island and Kowloon were actually held perpetually, while the area called the New Territories, which was which was the rest of Hong Kong, and that was actually most of Hong Kong, was held for 150 years. So technically only the New Territories had to go back to China in 1999. However, the British assessed it and they determined that Hong Kong Island and Kowloon were too small to survive on their own. So they used it as leverage. So basically what they said was they would hand the entire territory back to China if China agreed to not change the system for 50 years, which China agreed to. So that was the agreement. And in 1999, the tanks rolled across the border. I believe they actually rolled across the border 12 hours early. It was 12 hours before the actual handover, so that they were in the city by the time that the troops were in the city by the time that the handover happened. Anyway, so that was the agreement between the UK and communist China, and it certainly seemed to mostly be working until relatively recently. And there seems to be some question in the last few years about whether China has been sticking to that as much, and they may be changing things in Hong Kong a bit. So yeah, so I never really viewed it as an experiment on the part of China. It was they had an agreement with the UK.
Okay.
But of course, 25 years odd down the track or whatever it happens to be, if they decide to renege on the agreement now, honestly, what's the UK going to do about it? But having said that, as far as I know, it's been a cash cow for the Soviet, for communist China, for the People's Republic of China. So I was when they started. It looked a few years ago like they were maybe starting to tamper with the system in Hong Kong a bit. I was actually a little surprised, given that I think it's actually been producing a lot more money for China. It's disproportionately large amount of money for China than you would expect. So I was actually expecting personally that the Chinese were not going to tamper with the system because it seemed to be benefiting them. But in the last few years, it does seem that they seem to be tweaking it a little bit.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just saying that every time socialists and communist nations have to kind of save themselves, they have to introduce a little bit of capitalism to it. Yeah, that's
that's a good. Yeah, that is a good point, actually, and that's kind of was my basis for believing that they would leave. My expectation was that China would perpetually complain about Hong Kong, right, and say and be very angry that the British required them to not change the system for 50 years, all the while cashing the checks that were coming from Hong Kong. Right.
Right.
So that's my suspicion. That was
That's more the spirit of what I implied there.
yeah,
So
yeah, right.
mhm.
So that's kind of obviously politically they've been clamping down in Hong Kong, but then uh, Hong Kong was never that democratic even under British rules. So in fact, oddly enough, or perhaps not oddly enough, the British actually started to democratize the place in the years prior to handing it over.
Mhm.
But before that, it wasn't very democratic. But so I'm not surprised that the Chinese have clamped down politically, but I am a little surprised that it seems they've been tampering with the economy. But I haven't heard much in the last couple of years. Maybe they've stopped doing that. So, which goes
Yeah,
back to our point about, yeah, as I said, I think that it would make they would perpetually complain about it while enjoying
mhm.
the flow of cash. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I want to make clear is that if it's still under state control, even if it's under Lenin, it's still not really a free market. As long as it's under all that control, it's not considered free, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was only a limited capitalism. Exactly. That's right. It was
exactly,
that
yeah,
the
yeah,
state still had the power to clamp
right,
down if they felt it
right,
was
sure.
appropriate.
And
Yeah.
really, let's put this more in perspective, though. If a society is totally, absolutely communist, there's no kind of like injection of capitalism in any sense at all, then it's simply going to completely collapse. But I would actually make a case that a mixed economy is much more evil and totalitarian. Like the mixture of both that professes the virtues
Okay.
of communism while kind
Mhm.
of standing on the top standing on the backs, I suppose, of capitalist work. That I consider that to be a genuinely evil system, I think.
Mhm.
It actually really gives power to those authoritarians, I think.
And in fact, I think you just described the People's Republic of China. Yeah,
Exactly. Yep.
because mainland China, of course, has been introducing more capitalism over the last
hmm
few decades,
Right.
probably far more
hmm
than would have been at the handover. Was it 97 or
Right. Yeah.
99?
hmm
That would have been at the handover. But yeah, there's a lot more capitalism going on now, but they
Yeah.
are still politically authoritarian.
Exactly.
So this reminds me of something actually, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a movie called Americathon. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Americathon, as in
Americathon. It was a
like
comedy movie done in the 70s. As in, like,
yeah,
it was basically the premise of the
yeah.
movie is that the United States is bankrupt and a telethon is held to save the country. That's
Uh-huh.
basically
I see. I
what it
see.
amounts to, right?
Yeah.
But
Okay.
Americathon is quite famous for having actually successfully predicted a number of things that occurred
Mm-hmm.
in the years after it was made.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there were some things that were wildly inaccurate, but one of the correct predictions they made was that communist China would go capitalist. So
Mm-hmm.
in the movie Americathon, which I think is set in 2000 or something like that, it was made in the 1970s. Uh, you've got yes, communist China, which well, sorry, China, but it's actually become quite capitalist. So and of
Right.
course that happened. So anyway, it's kind of hard to get. And I think there may have been a copy on YouTube at one point that
Mm-hmm.
the recording wasn't very good. But you know, it's an interesting movie to see, and I'm quite amused by it. So
I
it's
see.
probably
Mm-hmm.
worth a watch. If for
Gotcha.
nothing, than some of the predictions that were made that came
Okay.
true.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. Yeah.
didn't think that Americathon would come up there, but I highly recommend it if
Mm-hmm.
anyone got an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to see it.
Yeah. To
Yeah.
be sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's actually kind of amazing that anybody was incentivized to do anything at all in places like the Soviet Union, because like there had to have been a lot of screw ups due to some of the incompetence alone, post Stalin at least, right? And there's no what people need to kind of realize is that the profit motive, frankly, is fine. It actually incentivizes competency because else you're not going to get the money. They're going to want their money back. So so that's why it's actually kind of, and mistakes happen everywhere no matter what the
Mm.
system, but
Mm.
it's just kind of astounding to me that anything happened at all in the Soviet Union, because what there's two things that come to mind, the space program that competed with the
Mm.
American space program, and also the world of chess.
Mm.
So yeah, because I've been watching a Bobby Fischer documentary, and I talked about the Fischer and Spassky uh, match, a series of matches that was kind of going on at the time. Like everybody was like tuned in to Fisher versus Spassky at the time, and it's just amazing that it's like I, my understanding was Spassky wasn't even an actual communist personally at the time, but he was obviously sponsored by the Soviet Union. It's like
Mhm.
he had lots and lots and lots of training. It's just you know it is kind of you know interesting to me that that kind of spirit exists over there, and also things like Tetris. The guy who made Tetris was a
That's
Russian.
that's right.
Yeah, I think he's in America now, but back then, he made this really fun game and barely
Yeah.
got any royalties from it because those things were under Soviet control. The Soviet
Yep.
got most of it. But back to the space program, it's still amazing anything worked at all. I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting actually. I mean, and interestingly enough, there are a phenomenon I've noted is that if you look at comparable systems,
Mm.
there's often a brief period where the communist system is ahead, but it doesn't last very long. It lasts about 5 years, maybe 10 years. And I actually have an idea. I've thought about this. I don't know if you've ever sort of noticed this, but if you look at the Soviet space program was initially ahead of the American space program, and then of course
Well,
that
initially, yes, yeah.
initially, exactly. And then the
Mhm,
American space program went ahead. A
mhm,
similar thing happened in Korea when North Korea was actually ahead of South Korea economically for a few years, right?
mhm.
And I've been thinking about this, and I think there's a reason why this actually happens, right? So when the Soviet system or the communist system is being initially established, they have 5 year plans, for example, and they
Yeah,
spec out the
yeah,
plan,
yeah.
right. So I think my suspicion is that the initial problems facing the state are actually quite easy to quantify, and it's fairly easy to fix, right? And I suspect the communist system is actually pretty good at fixing those initial problems, right?
Mm,
But the problem is, I don't think it's dynamic enough to be able to continue to do so. So this is my kind of suspicion that their
mm,
first 5 year plan probably works quite well. They've got a set of problems. We've got famine, and we've got this one, okay, and they can go ahead and they can fix it, right? But as the system becomes more dynamic, that's when I think their system breaks down. It's just an idea I've been pondering recently. And so I suspect that's why I suspect they do quite well initially, maybe those first 5, maybe even 10 years, and then they start to fall behind because then they try it again. They try another 5 year plan. I suspect that the next set of problems they have are probably more complex, maybe harder to quantify, and their system of using a long-term plan doesn't work. It's not dynamic enough, and that's when it starts to break down. So anyway, that's my hypothesis.
mm. Right, right. If you call most of it working, I get what you're saying. It's sort of kind of like the idea of shooting your load and then running out of gas, kind of a thing.
I kind of feel like
Yeah.
it's not bad. They're not bad at getting the low hanging fruit,
Right,
but
yeah.
then it runs out of steam. Yeah. So
Right, right,
anyway,
exactly.
I
'Cause, yeah.
often know evidence of that beyond the historical record of where communist systems do tend to seem to do quite well initially, but then they stall fairly quickly.
Yeah, a bit of a like illusion of this great paradise, I think, is being set up, and then it kind of fails to
Mm.
back itself up, probably.
And that's right, because
Yeah.
the first problems they're solving are the easiest ones, and they're probably yes. So it works initially,
Hmm.
but then yeah, before long, it's the lack of dynamism in the system bites it.
Right, yeah. And by the way, this is no means an endorsement of communism. So,
No, not at all.
yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, right.
That's right, because it's
Mhm,
really just an initial shot of
mhm,
success, which is
mhm.
very, very quickly burns out. 5 years, 10 years
Exactly.
tops.
Yeah, I was thinking about that first shot. It's like the the United States was put on a lot of pressure because of Sputnik.
Mhm.
Because they got their thing out in space, and they think that because of this starting lead that kind of gave the illusion, I suppose, that the Soviet Union was a leading nation in this in
Mhm.
that whole space race regard.
Mhm.
But let me tell you something. I said this in the program before. I don't remember, but Sputnik was the space age equivalent of a guy on YouTube saying first in a comment.
Yes, it was very
Yeah.
basic. Yeah, all
Yes,
it did was just
exactly.
transmit a separate, just orbited the Earth and transmitted a very, very simple signal. That's
Exactly. Yeah.
right.
It was
Yep.
beeping space junk. That's
Yeah,
all
that's what it was.
Sputnik
Yes.
was. Yes,
And
that's right.
a lot of Americans were horrified that I think they deliberately designed the orbit to go over the US because a lot of Americans were horrified that they
Really.
could turn their radio on, right, and
Hmm.
hear Sputnik coming over
Hmm.
the country. So
Right.
yes.
Yep. And then they threw dogs into space and killed them.
Yes, I
Yeah.
was going to mention that too. Actually, another aspect of the Soviet space program was being a bit slipshod with safety standards and also being willing to kill animals, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that the American program has not been willing to do.
Right.
So there have been
Exactly. Yeah.
accidents, but they've never set out with
Well,
the
yeah.
expectation that an animal would not come back. That's right, and that
Yeah,
of course would have
exactly.
slowed it down too. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
That would have actually
Yes, for
slowed it
sure.
down
Yeah.
quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and also, both sides had, stuff put on the moon. I think the Americans did in fact beat them to the moon for sure.
Mm.
And
And this,
go ahead.
I was going to say the Soviets obviously only ever did unmanned probes as well to the moon. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I actually don't recall which country landed an unmanned probe first. You think it was the US? I don't recall. I should know that. I
Yeah.
was such a space geek when I was a kid, but
I think I'm in the same boat as you are. It's there. It's just kind of not
yeah,
popping into my
yeah,
head. Yeah, right.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it was fairly. I think it may have been fairly close, but yeah.
mm,
Anyway, the Soviets only ever landed, obviously, landed unmanned probes on the moon.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And since then, for the most part, Russians had terrible luck in terms of probing other, extraterrestrial spaces. Like the only places where they had any success was Venus.
I was just going
Yeah.
to say the Venera probes were actually quite
Hmm.
successful. That's right.
Yeah,
For
sure.
those who don't know, for those who don't know, the surface temperature of Venus is about 400 Celsius and the pressure is
Hmm.
about 90 atmospheres. And probes are measured, the survival of the probes on the surface is measured in minutes. I think 90 minutes is about the longest they've managed. So they
Yep.
basically crash land on the
Hmm.
surface and send as much data back about the atmosphere as possible before they implode.
Yeah, sure. By the way, to those people who say men are from Mars, women are from Venus, Venus resembles hell. So,
Yes, it
yeah,
does.
mhm, exactly.
That's yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and the Russians also you know sucked at Mars. They could like everything kind of went wrong when it came to Mars. So yeah, yeah.
Yes, and I think and there was nothing like the Pioneer or Voyager probes launched by the Soviet Union either. So
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
the one of the Voyager probes, Voyager 1, I believe, is now the furthest man-made object from the Earth.
Hmm. Yep.
So yeah, so Voyager 2, if I remember correctly, was launched first, which
Hmm.
may seem counterintuitive, but Voyager 1 had an alternate path that took it a little bit further out, and so
Yep.
or a little bit faster, I should say. So yeah, so that's why Voyager 1 is actually, I believe, is actually the furthest object out at the moment.
Right,
Yeah,
sure, yeah.
yeah.
I will say this though, the Buran spacecraft was interesting. I do that. Yes.
That was a shuttle that the
Yeah,
Soviet
the
Union
shuttle.
did
Yes.
exactly. The program didn't get very. They built
No.
one. As far as I know, they never did a launch though, did they? Or at least not a manned
Well,
launch.
I
Um,
I mean there
I
were
could be
projected
wrong.
flights. There was one
Yeah.
orbital launch. I'm looking at the
Yeah.
Wikipedia on that one right
Was it
now.
anybody in it, or was it unmanned? I don't know because I think even the
Let's
American shuttle was did an
It's
unmanned flight.
uncrewed. Wikipedia says uncrewed. So yeah.
Uncrewed, right? Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I had
Yeah.
a feeling there were never any crewed
Hmm.
flights of the brand.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I think the Soviet Union, fall of the Soviet Union, put a bit of a crimp in that too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
but yeah,
It's
it's
actually a
actually
shame. Yeah, it is a shame because that actually does look like an interesting spacecraft. The energy concept looks interesting to me.
yeah, and it physically looks quite like the shuttle too, which is interesting. I
Mm,
guess it naturally, naturally end up with that something like that sort of design, I suppose.
yeah, right.
But yes, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it is an interesting spacecraft to look at.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yep.
absolutely. So, yeah, that conversation started with the new economic policy, which, as I said, I
Oh
was
yeah.
quite shocked to discover.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Do we have anything further on that, or the Soviet Union, or China, or Hong Kong?
Bunch of commies.
Oh, I just want to say Taiwan is a
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
I'm very much in the Taiwan as a country camp.
Of
And
course.
anytime that anyone asks me this, my response will be Taiwan as a country. So,
Well, I was not aware that people were so dead set on it being not a country.
well, officially, very few countries recognize it so, as a country. So,
Mm.
certainly Australia doesn't. The United States doesn't recognize it as a country.
Really?
Yeah, they
Really?
don't have. There's no embassy of the people's. So, by the way, the proper name of the country is, of course, the Republic of China, and there's no embassy of the Republic of China in the United States. However, there is a kind of special interest section or
Yeah.
something
Hmm.
that is all but an embassy. Same in Australia.
Yeah.
Western countries, because if you recognize the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China will cut off access to, will cut off
Yeah.
diplomatic ties with you, and nobody
Oh,
wants to do that
wow.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even in recent years, some countries have switched recognition from the Republic of China to the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not assuming that anyone doesn't know this, but yeah, Taiwan is Republic of China as
That's
opposed
right.
to
Yes,
China, which is the People's Republic of China.
exactly. So Taiwan is
Mhm.
the proper name of Taiwan is the Republic of China. By the way, and this is I think it's really important to know the American ally, and I specifically say American ally because
Mhm.
the Chinese were allied to the United States during prior to World War II and during World War II, not really the rest of the allies. It
Yep.
was really a relationship with
Yep.
the United States, right?
Mhm. Yep.
That ally was the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China. A lot of people don't realize this. It was the political unit that controls that controls the Taiwan now, the Republic of China,
Mhm.
is the same one that was allied to the United States and was fighting the Japanese in
Yes, right.
mainland
Mhm.
China, right?
Yep.
And
Right. Yeah.
the Chinese communists didn't really
Mhm.
do much against the Japanese.
Mhm.
They like to imply now that they did, but they didn't, right? And basically, the Republic of China was severely weakened as a result of having fought the Japanese in
Right.
mainland China,
Right.
and then the after the war, the PRC with the backing of the Soviet Union was able to defeat the Republic of
Mhm.
China and force them back to Taiwan. My recollection is that they had actually controlled Taiwan since 1912, so I think that's actually when they date the origin of their state from.
Yep.
But anyway, yeah, I want to be very clear about that. The ally of the United States in World War II was the Republic of China, Taiwan.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And
not China more generally.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna mention something tangential here. So the inventor of cup noodles was born in Japanese Taiwan, and Taiwan was under Japanese colonial rule, and you
Yes.
know yeah, right. And yeah, and I still consider him a hero for inventing it. But so way off base. Recently I had the absolute displeasure of eating s'mores cup noodles. S'mores flavored cup
Sorry,
noodles.
how does that work?
S'mores.
Yes.
So
Wheat.
I don't know, like you know, it was just a stupid idea. We just saw it at Walmart one time in the clearance section. So we just so as like I think I bought one as a dare, so my wife can watch me eat it. So um I at first I thought it was gonna be like ramen noodles in hot cocoa or something like that because it had these little marshmallows and stuff. It didn't have the other ingredients in it. But so I tried it. It wasn't quite hot cocoa, but you know, it just
Didn't work.
well, it no, it was kind of inedible, honestly. I
Sure.
gave up. I gave up.
Which
I couldn't do it. Yeah.
which may
So
explain why they're on clearance. There's that capitalism again.
right, yeah, yeah, to be sure, yeah. But capitalism is about knowing what doesn't work. So
That's
you
right.
know,
And they
yeah.
discovered it, didn't they? That's right.
Mhm.
Yes.
Right, yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, maybe I shouldn't have done it because my wife said that last time she went to Walmart, she saw them on this in stock again after the fact that I bought from the clearance section.
Oh,
So
right.
so maybe
Interesting.
maybe I really screwed something up. I don't know.
Oh dear.
But
Yes.
yeah, I highly do not recommend the s'mores cup noodles. No, stick to the traditional stuff. I'll do
Yeah, right.
the original curry and seafood any day. So yeah.
So noted if I ever come across them. Hopefully I won't. At one
Yeah.
point, you mentioned about this gentleman was in Japanese-controlled Taiwan, and
Hmm.
said Taiwan was a colony. My
Exactly.
my understanding, though, is interestingly enough, is that Taiwan today has very good relations with Japan.
That's my
Uh,
understanding. Yes. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that apparently, if there is a problem, like if there is an attack by China, apparently Japan has made it clear that they will come to the aid
Mhm.
of Taiwan, because
Right.
they have this long-standing, friendship with Taiwan. So,
Hmm.
yeah. Anyway, I do think it's interesting that most countries probably often, would be fair to say, have a fairly negative view of their former colonial
Hmm.
masters, but apparently
Right.
Taiwan actually quite a lot of infrastructure was built on Taiwan during the Japanese occupation. So
Yeah.
it's
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I think that probably raised the profile of, and raised the
I
opinion
suppose.
of the,
Yeah. And
yeah.
that
So
sounds about right. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I think that's interesting that they continue to have good relations, and yeah, and Japan
Yeah.
has made it clear they'll support
Hmm.
Taiwan.
Right.
That's all I have on that topic.
Yep.
I have one more topic I wanted to discuss before my regular before a regular reference to Zoe McLellan.
All right. Sounds good. Let's do it.
So my third one. Okay, and I'm actually going to make a point of mentioning this fairly regularly. I've decided. I mean, maybe I should have even mentioned. I think I have actually quickly mentioned this a couple of times, but I'm kind of regretting not
Mm.
having mentioned this in a lot more of our recordings.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of data that supports what we're saying. We often see people just outright lie, or sometimes lie and deny that's the case. Sometimes say it out of ignorance, and they say, "Oh, the data doesn't support you," and so forth.
Okay.
Um, there is a lot of data, but I do see that people on our side, in my view, a lot of the time don't present the best data available. They may, for example, if we're talking about domestic violence, a bit over half of all, or should, to be clear here, we're talking about, well, the term is, casual term is often domestic violence, but technically it's intimate partner violence. If we're talking, a little bit over half of intimate partner violence is reciprocal, which means both partners are both perpetrators and victims.
Yep.
And of non-reciprocal violence, around about 2/3 to 70% is female on
Mm.
male, and about a
Right.
third is male on female. Okay,
Mm.
that's what the data shows. And if any feminists are listening, their ears just steam just blew out of their ears from what I just said. Okay,
Hmm.
now
Right.
there was a study out of Harvard, I think it was, that came to this result, right? Came to
Hmm.
this conclusion. I often see it mentioned. Yep, absolutely true, and actually. Harvard tried to bury the study actually
Mm. Of
and I
course.
think I have a copy of the full study still somewhere, right? Absolutely all true, but there's better data out there.
Mm.
So
Yep.
uh, there's something called a meta-analysis, and and I see a lot of people uneasy with this term. They don't understand it. I'd like to just explain it. This is something I will be
Mm.
doing, I think more often, because
Mm.
really need to understand this. The partner abuse. So if you've heard of PASC, Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project,
Okay.
which is that is a meta-analysis. Okay, so I'll explain what a meta-analysis is. Uh, Individual studies, first of all, a study can be, there's actually a number of different studies, but two of the major categories are a cross-sectional study and a longitudinal study. Most studies are cross-sectional. That means that you just basically take a cross-section of the society, talking about, say, studying human behavior here, or in this case, intimate partner violence or whatever.
Mhm.
You look at a lot of data. You either look at maybe police data if you're able to, or most of them aren't, but if you're able to, you might have questionnaires. You may just be looking at injuries, the hospital reported in hospitals, or whatever. But
Yeah.
you're taking a snapshot of society. Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
Uh, then there are longitudinal studies. Longitudinal studies, in the case of studies of people, uh, well, they are long-term studies, hence the name. If you were studying people, this could mean starting to study a group of people when they were children, when they were babies, and studying them through their entire life. Longitudinal studies do also exist in other areas, but they're more often associated with population groups.
Yep.
There's a very big such study called the Dunedin study. That's actually from Dunedin in New Zealand, not Dunedin in Scotland.
Okay.
There's a group of people who are a little bit younger than me. I think only a year or two younger. Starting at birth, all the people born at a particular hospital in I think it was 1974 were enrolled voluntarily. Their parents agreed to it in the
Mhm.
study.
Yep.
The vast majority of them continue to be in the study. They are tested through their life, right? So actually, I was going to talk about longitudinal studies too, and then I'll get on to meta-analyses. So, but I guess I've already started talking about longitudinal studies.
Mhm.
Uh, this offers a better result than a cross-sectional study because you are studying the same population over time. If you do a cross-sectional study, you're studying different populations at the one time. A classic example of this was a study that was done on left-handed people. I'm left-handed, so I took
Yeah.
particular in this
Ah,
one.
okay. I didn't know that.
Right. So there was a study done when I was a kid or something along those lines, which said left-handed people didn't live as long as right-handed people. Okay. And I believed it when I first heard it. And there were all sorts of explanations like they're more likely to have accidents because the world is built for right-handed people and that sort of thing. Okay. Right. But when you look at the study, what they did was they looked at people in preschool and they looked at people in old age homes and they compared the proportions who are left-handed, and they found more left-handed people in preschool than old age homes and concluded that people who were left-handed were dying earlier and not making it to the old age homes. Right. But there's all sorts of reasons why that could be the case. And in actual fact, a lot of people were converted from left-handed to right-handed during life. In fact, they even tried that with me when I was a kid. I'm
Oh,
actually old
really?
enough. Yes, they really did try that. But I'm a bit stubborn. You may not see it. You may not, people may not get that from me, but I can be extremely stubborn, right?
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
basically decided in grade one that the
Mhm.
only way they were going to make me write with my right hand is if they put a teacher in front of me all the time, right? Because every time they turned their back, I switched. Anyway, they gave up. It didn't take them long. I was only getting into my stride, and they gave up. Anyway, they tried it with me, but I was among the youngest
Mhm.
people that's tried with it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
certainly people who are in the 60s, 70s, 80s now, this was very common. So now they think that it's probably not the case, and that left-handed people, in fact, do not live a shorter
Right.
lifespan on average, right?
Hmm.
It was more about the fact that a lot was going on. But that's an example of the flaw, of a type of flaw you can see in a cross-sectional study. If the researchers don't properly address those sort of variables, actually what they call confounding factors, then they can draw bad conclusions. In contrast, if you did that with a longitudinal study and you noted at 3 years of age that 7% of the people were left-handed, and then you know 50 or 70 years later you discover there's less of them being left-handed, you can actually track it. You might, if there had been attempts to change them from one hand to the other, you could see that in the data. So
Yeah.
longitudinal studies are much more valuable. So yeah, I originally meant to talk about meta-analyses and then longitudinal studies, but it's gone around the other way.
Mm.
So longitudinal studies, such as the Dunedin study, there's another one in North America as well, and that I've got some that I can talk about in more detail later. These results are much more compelling than the cross-sectional studies. And guess what? All the longitudinal studies say that there's a high rate of reciprocal partner violence, and that there's a high level that's close to parity. There's either parity or close to parity. They all show that, right?
Right.
If the studies that claim this isn't the case are invariably cross-sectional studies, right? Single cross-sectional studies, which brings us to a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is where you take a large number of studies and you look across the entire set of studies and you draw conclusions from that. And the value in that is that you can reduce the bias of individual researchers. Researcher bias is a huge problem. And if you see, and particularly in these cross-sectional studies, you'll see quite a lot of bias. Most researchers won't outright lie. That would be academic fraud, but there's a lot of, you can push that line, you can really run close to the line and without actually lying, right? A meta-analysis will look across, it can take years sometimes to do this. They look across all these studies and then they draw conclusions from the set, and they help to wipe out or at least reduce biases from the researchers, and also systemic problems. Sometimes there are systemic problems in the individual studies too, and they tend to cancel each other out. So
Right.
you get a stronger result from a meta-analysis than you do from individual studies. And if we look at the largest meta-analysis of DV IPV research ever undertaken, the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project, what do we find? But a little bit over half of all partner violence is reciprocal. and of the unidirectional violence, about 2/3 is female and male, and about 1/3 is male and female. So the famous Harvard study that keeps getting referenced said it was about 70%. PAS came in at 67%. So there's a few percentage points there. But I think the fact that this trend, the fact that this is a trend, that is very clear. That more than half of the partner violence is reciprocal. Of the remainder, about 2/3 to 70% is female and male.
Gotcha.
So, yep, and any feminists listening, are very angry at this point when we're saying this. But all I can say is the meta-analyses and the longitudinal studies that are the most compelling data we have say this. When you look at the claims of counter arguments, they tend to be, when they even are, sometimes there actually aren't studies behind it, but when they are, they tend to be cross-sectional studies, so which aren't as compelling. So really, I think in my view, they're actually cherry picking the data to push a point. So now I've read a lot of these studies, including cross-sectional studies. The individual researchers in general, in my view, are trying to be honest about it. They're very cautious. They don't want to be accused of academic fraud, obviously. I think in most cases, the researchers themselves are trying to produce an honest result. If there are limitations in their own methodology, they will put that in. They're supposed to put it in, and I've seen them do that in I think virtually all the cases. So I don't really blame the researchers so much as I blame the people who are manipulating that data and trying to push an ideology. That's my position on it.
Yeah.
So anyway, the studies are, I find them interesting anyway. They're really interesting to look at. So anyway, meta-analyses and longitudinal studies. I remember back at the March for Men in 2018, there was some student journalists there, and one of the student journalists asked to interview me, and I said yes. And she started talking about IPV, and I mentioned PASC and a meta-analysis, and she said something like, what does your study say on this? And I said, it's not a study, it's a meta-analysis. Make sure you understand the difference. And I do think a lot of people right now on both sides don't understand this. It's very important that we understand what this is, what the difference is, and how important meta-analyses are, and how important longitudinal studies are, and how compelling the results can be. And this is something I'll be mentioning semi-regularly, because I do think it is something we really need to pick up again.
Well, is that a subject for a AVFM article, maybe?
Yes, I think it should be. I haven't written one for a little while. I've got about 3 or 4 in preparation, actually. But yes, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, sure, right, yeah. And speaking of AVFM articles, you haven't seen the last of me. I'm still working on them. I'm kind of juggling like half a dozen ideas right now, but there's one that has headway. So
Nice.
So I'm actually going to try and do an article at least like one article every month or two. I'm going to try and get back into the groove. I don't mean to be inactive. I'm not really inactive at all. It's just life is busy. So
I've probably been more bursty with articles than I probably should have been. Sometimes I'll push out a few in the space of a couple of months, and then I won't do any for a few months. So I probably should be more pace myself a bit more regular with it.
Yeah, right. So
that's all I have on those topics: longitudinal studies, meta-analyses. They're both talked about on Wiki for Men. There are plenty of other sources that we'll talk about these about both of these ideas. And that's the other thing I was just going to quickly mention. I've seen people people on our side refer to PASC as a report. Again, it's not a report, it's a meta-analysis. Don't be afraid of the word meta-analysis. If your audience doesn't understand what a meta-analysis is, explain it to them. It's very important.
Okay, sounds good. Can you repeat that? Because I don't know if it's my headset or the technology, but you kind of cut out mid-explanation. So,
all right. So, but just basically saying,
yes,
just basically saying that if you're if you have an audience and you're talking about anti-feminist ideas or men's rights or whatever, don't be afraid to use the term meta-analysis and longitudinal studies. I've seen people not use the term meta-analysis and call PASC a report and so forth. It is a meta-analysis. If you don't think your audience knows what that means, just explain it. And a meta-analysis is essentially a review and a summary of a very large number of studies with the intention of smoothing out biases and methodological problems in the individual studies. And meta-analyses and longitudinal studies offer much more compelling results than other types of studies like cross-sectional studies. So if you're wanting to explain to people why intimate partner violence has got gender parity and so forth, use the best data that's available. Actually, I think I might have lost audio briefly there as well.
What?
Oh, you're back. Sorry. Yes, I thought
Oh
I might
yeah,
have.
no, I didn't even say anything. So yeah, I was
Okay, no worries.
just acknowledging. Yeah,
No worries. Okay, so that's all I have on research. I've got a couple of things I want to talk about in the future. Myers-Briggs, I mentioned it last time, was a bit of a teaser.
Yeah.
The last
Yeah.
2 weeks I've been busy with all sorts of things and haven't had a chance to look at it. I'm aiming to talk about that at the next goalpost. And the other one, maybe not in the next goalpost, but soon, nuclear reactors. I think I could almost talk about nuclear reactors off the top of my head, but I would actually like to review a few things.
Same
just
here.
to-
I want to be caught up on the subject before we go into this one for sure.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, so I've got a few things I want to say about nuclear reactors, but I will. But a spoiler, I'm pro-nuclear, pro-modern nuclear.
Yep.
As an aside, actually, and this is actually what prompted me to bring it up at the moment. I'm actually watching the Chernobyl series from 2018. I think it was 2019.
Right.
I've never
Yeah.
seen it.
Speaking of, Soviet incompetencies,
Exactly. So
Right. Yeah.
don't judge all nuclear reactors by Chernobyl, really, because
Right. Exactly.
the designs have changed. There were a lot of systemic problems in the Soviet system itself,
Yep.
which led to this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think, in my view, the series I think is covering quite well. I've only watched 2 episodes so far, but they're really good at talking about all the official sort of dodging responsibility and denying
Yep.
reality. Where one of the managers at the plant was in a room denying that there was a problem with the core while the core was exposed about a few hundred meters away. So,
Oh my
and he's,
God. Yeah.
oh no, there's no problem. So,
Right.
anyway, yeah. So this got me thinking. It's a topic though that I have been meaning to bring up anyway. And yeah, I think we can have an interesting discussion about nuclear reactors. I'm going to say something that I think most people won't know about nuclear reactors because it doesn't get talked about much, even though it should.
Okay. Well, let's gear towards that episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you
Yeah.
go. That's a spoiler. That's clickbaity, I should say then.
Right. Sounds good.
All right, and I'm going to before we go, I'd like to talk about Zoe McLellan.
Yes, let's do that.
Yes. As of September 2024, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McLellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McLellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McLellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McLellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McLellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. So I know a few people who speak Spanish, and I'm going to ask them to assist me in translating a document into Spanish with a view to posting it on Costa Rican sites. So if Zoe McLellan is in Costa Rica, I'd like the people of Costa Rica to know this, and perhaps somebody there might even see her. That's all I have for tonight.
Yep. Sounds good. We're all out.
Thank you. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yep. See you then. Bye.
Bye.